So tonight, welcome to the part of the evening where we're going to hear the talks. We're in the theme of the beating heart of Buddhism. So we're talking about the 6 paramittas, the path of practice of the trainee bodhisattva for the benefit of all beings. That's what we're doing. And we're on to the meditation paramitta. We've done a couple of evenings on meditation, and tonight we're going to hear personal talks from 3 of our Sangha members on how they work in meditation. So how I work in meditation, that's the title of their talks. 3 short talks. We did originally have Lou was going to speak this evening, and she's really sad to not be here, but she needs to be with family this evening. And Jenny has stood in at short notice. Thank you, Jenny. And going to give a talk. Great. So how I work in meditation. So Jenny's going to go first, talking about her own meditation practice, primarily the mindfulness of breathing. And then we have Karmajit. He's going to go next. Again, talking personally about his meditation practice, mostly the metta. And then we've got T talking about how she works in meditation as a support in life. Okay, so Jenny's going to go first, and we'll just have the speakers one after the other. We won't have another introduction in between. Jenny, thank you.
Oh, lovely. Actually, it's so nice to be here. I was in London today, and the mindfulness of breathing, which is my topic, actually came in very handy. My train was due to arrive at Sheffield at 6 p.m, so I thought, great. But then get to St Pancras, the overhead cables are broken. So I was like, okay. If I can't get there in time, I'll call Sangha. But looks all right for now. What can I do? I will do the mindfulness of breathing. Because I just thought, I want to put myself in as best a mental state as I can. But then I thought, actually, there's a whole load of us on this train. And you could feel the energy kind of like, lurching around. And I thought, how can I help this situation? And I thought, well, if I just try and improve my mental states and ground myself, you don't know what will happen. So anyway, but the subtitle of my talk was going to be actually mindfulness of breathing, our checkered past. So I haven't always been so grounded by the mindfulness of breathing. So I thought I'd just explain a bit about that, because it may be that some of you here have had your moments with it, or may still be having a moment. So this is a glimmer of hope that it can. Our relationship with meditation is always changing, isn't it? And actually, even if you love it, I think kind of reflecting on it, it can go through stale periods. Some of you know this, but I was living in America for a while, and I came back to the UK 10 years ago, and I came to Buddhism in America through a slightly different tradition, the Vipassana tradition. And so in terms of meditation, there's actually far more similarities than differences. But being a human being, I saw the differences. So I came here, and part of me was like, why do we need 4 stages to the mindfulness of breathing? I'm not used to this. And also I was used to a meditation practice where actually, rather than focusing on your breath, you focused on a kind of external object. So you often just focused on sound as opposed to breathing. So it could be birdsong, heating, whatever was going on. And so I came to Tiratna, and I think, those of you that know me, I mean, generally I'm a fairly obedient person. I think generally I'm seen as fairly obedient, I think. But I have this little teenager. I think she lives around here. And the little teenage part of me, she doesn't like being told what to do when she doesn't quite understand it. And so it's a bit like this with this change of practice. Like, part of me was like, well, what I was doing was just fine. Like, why do I have to change? Like, do these new stages and things. And I'm not encouraging you all just to, listen to your teenagers and act it out, because that would be anarchy. But I think often these little teenage bits of us, and we all carry them. They have some wisdom, because they're maybe scared about something, and they're getting stroppy about it. But actually, that fear is worth listening to. And so I didn't really consciously listen, but I did. What ended up happening kind of subconsciously was, I guess I was feeling uncomfortable with the mindfulness of breathing at some level. And then a few years in, I went to a retreat that was, it was actually more about the metab, actually, and it was called Body of Awareness. And it was about, it was really about inhabiting your body more fully, being aware of the body, so the breath, but also the wider side of things. And it was interesting, because I've had a very tricky. I haven't liked my body for a lot of my life. It's been lots of hatred towards this, actually. And so then I realised, well, of course I would like attending to sound rather than my own body, because actually trying to do the mindfulness of breathing when actually being in my body actually just could trigger quite negative thoughts. It could get me into dodgy places that weren't expansive, they weren't grounding. So it kind of made sense to me then why I'd liked I felt more anchored by having my attention outside of myself. But then this retreat, it was led so kindly in so many different ways into the body. And I started to realize that my body, well, it had all this stuff it wanted to tell me that I'd ignored for years, and it could feel nice. And I could feel grounded in it. Blow me down. This was not. I had decades of just hating this thing, and so it was a game changer, and I think it really helped me start to see that the intersection with metta and mindfulness of breathing, I saw that attention to the body was loving kindness, and that loving kindness was also attention. And so things have just slowly shifted. I've got more into body awareness, yoga, just softening. And it's made my body a kind of safer place to be, so that then now, if I try the mindfulness of breathing, actually it's okay to focus on the breath. It's okay to receive it with this body, because it feels much more of a kind of safe vessel. And kind of going along a few more years, I went to another retreat. And I hope you're seeing that retreats here can be quite handy. This one was at Vajraloka, and it was led by Tejananda, who some of you will know. And he's a magic man, and he always starts a meditation by getting you into the body. And he was doing this one thing where he got you to imagine your attention. It's usually up here. It goes in a lift down. You kind of mentally imagine it going down to this area that he calls the hara, which is it's kind of like 3 fingers down from your belly button, and then you kind of go into the middle of your body. Sounds a bit weird, but if I go into that space with my attention, there's a really expansive, open feeling. And from there, then he would lead us into mindfulness of breathing. If I'm coming into it from there, it's open and it's grounding, and it's kind of, it's what, like the 10 years before, I heard people saying about the mindfulness of breathing, which I just couldn't resonate with at all. So I've got a really different relationship with it now. And even I was listening to a meditation last week. This woman called Judith was leading it. And she was asked, she asked us to start it by coming into your body. And I'm realizing for me that the mindfulness of breathing, it works for me best if I come into the body, and then the breath becomes fascinating. Anyway, Judith, going back to Judith, she was saying, you can do a body scan, like feel your feet, feel different parts of you. And she said, don't just imagine your foot, or don't even just take your attention down there, actually like be your foot, which again might sound a bit mad, but actually, I moved my attention into my foot, and I just felt so like grounded, and I had a real different sense of things, like not because I'm such a heady person. So actually experiencing myself from my feet was just grounding, and just for me, it just helps me get out of my mind and really see reality a lot more clearly. So what I'd just say in summary is, so whether your kind of relationship with the mindfulness of breathing, if it's good, then great. But if there are kind of struggles from time to time or all the time, I think just listen to what the teenager or the perfectionist or whoever is talking to you, listen to what they're saying, because I think they're onto something, even if they kind of take it in different directions or can push you away. Listen to them, because there's some wisdom in those kind of like thoughts, because if you let them kind of, if you kind of give them airspace, then I think you can really see changes in your meditation. So, thank you.
Hello. I've got new glasses and I can't see out unless I read. Anyway. So if I put them on, I can't see you. But I can't read without them. So anyway, thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to talk about the metta bhavana. And I was going to talk a bit about when I got introduced to the practice, but I think I will do that quickly, I think, because it was quite important for me. It was actually probably the first time I had any sort of involvement with a Buddhist group. So I was with a Tiratna practitioner in Kathmandu. So I've talked about going to Kathmandu before some of the talks, but that was the meditation that was introduced to me at that time. So I'd been a yoga practitioner before then for probably about 10 years. So I did a lot of mindfulness and breathing, and I was very good at it, and like quite focused, and kind of I could be quite disciplined, and I was quite, be right on there, you know what I mean? But it was very internal, and it was sort of very well, it was kind of high level, I could say. I thought it was anyway, and then but it was limited because it was all in my head. I think it became quite insular sort of practice. It was all about my ability to be able to focus, really. So it became quite competitive myself. So I got introduced to the metta bhavana, and it was just this relief. It was like I don't know how old you are, but I remember when television went from black and white to colour. Some people might remember from movies from black and white to colour, but I remember from TV going black. It was like that. It was a really big change. Something was like quite vivid, and it was exciting, and I was really into it because it was sort of like a release. It was an emotional tone to the meditation which I never experienced before, and also involved me not thinking about myself but other people. So it was this whole thing about my 20-year-old self being quite a 20-year-old self who kind of, especially 20-year-old male, it's kind of like I was quite isolated, I think, and quite self-concerned. But what I noticed was in my behaviour, in my ethical life, it really made a difference. It was when I was in disputes or was in sort of conflict with someone, I was always separate. So it was always their problem and my problem. I'm going to deal with my problem, you're going to deal with your problem. You have a problem, it's your problem. It was very kind of separate in my relationships. And it was, I think it was because I was doing too much mindfulness of breathing, truthfully. It was just too much unbalanced. So I do practice both practices every day or every second day, sort of swap. I think that's an important part of the system of practice that we learn. So that was that. So the metta bhavana. So if we kind of jump to the end of the practice, this last stage where we all kind of end up. We're kind of like sitting around with 3 other sort of beings sort of sitting around. These I just visualize myself in a circle sort of thing. And we're sort of like, like a party situation, people we don't know, or again, it's an unlikely situation. You're sort of putting people together who would never really meet in real life sort of thing. And we're all sort of getting along. So we're sort of like, in spite of not like them, or we don't like them, or we don't even notice each other, we sort of just get along, and but the difference is that at that moment, that special moment, we're kind of totally aware of each other. And we're kind of aware of this sort of, there's this common deepest desire, I think, to be free from suffering. And there's this desire for each other to do the same. There's this sort of separateness disappears. There's a common desire for the welfare of each other. Okay. So this scene is sort of conjured up in our imagination, really. It's in our minds, but we have a real experience in our response. So even though it's, we're sort of engaging in sort of this landscape, we're entering this space, and there's but it's all in our heads. But the experience we have is a real experience. And we can have real experiences in our imagination. And that was one of the things I sort of thought about before, because I sort of thought, well, am I just making this up, or is it fantasy? But it's a difference than a fantasy, because there's something sort of, we're not in sort of some sort of this, I guess it's about the body thing too, like I'm genuinely talking about. We're not in sort of disembodied thinking space. We're sort of in embodied sort of sensory experience, sort of connected to the sense of energy or aliveness in our body, as while we're engaging with something in our imagination. So it's that experience is the thing, I think, that you kind of, or what I really like to connect with. So metta, I think, can be defined as sort of a kindly awareness of the being of another and ourselves. For me, that's my definition in my head. So it's not sort of just a feeling thing. It's sort of an experience of desire. It's a desire for something. So a deep desire to be happy and to be free from suffering, and to feel and notice this desire in myself. And then to try and strengthen this sort of aspiration to do this. And this desire becomes to sort of transform into something a bit more solid and reliable. I think it will transform into some sort of commitment to something that becomes very valuable to you, but you can't talk about it sometimes. It's this sort of shared value of humanity or aliveness that sort of seems to exist beyond just our own experience, because we kind of can sort of involve other people in that. So we sort of have this awareness of other people. We kind of expand that. We sort of expand that awareness in this sort of practice. We sort of become more. It's sort of what sort of comes revealed is the way I sort of benchmark, I guess, is sort of like what happens in my ethical life. So for me, the meditation is really connected to the precepts and ethics. And these sort of precepts, our precepts that we talk about, are really about our relationships with other people. That's what they're about. They're about how we relate. And sort of this thing about like liking or not liking or being indifferent kind of reflects sort of internal stories, really. These sort of internal stories are sort of like a soap opera that we have that sort of go in our head. So, I'm putting this person here because they did this, and I don't want them to be there like that, and I like this person because I, like that sort of thing about them, or they're inspirational or whatever. But actually, we kind of, when you meditate more, when you practice the metabhavana more, you start to bring the precepts into the meditation. So for me, a big thing is the truth test. Is this story I'm saying a truthful communication to myself? Is this story true? That's the first thing I sort of think about. Well, actually, it's not wholly true, because it's only from my own perspective. But when I try and imagine the other person's perspective, I can see that fixed truth that I have about the situation is probably not as reliable as I think it is. And then from that basis, I can't really say that I dislike them, really. I can't. make that jump. It sort of kills that off a bit for me. So this sort of thing about, so the other thing too, I guess, about it from a precept's point of view, is that you imagine these sort of situations with these people, and then you meet them on the street or in your office or here or wherever, and then you kind of got this incongruence. You sort of, this is the first thing I've kind of remembered noticing about the practice, is that I'm thinking about them in a certain way. When I'm with them, I kind of remember how I can think about them in a different way. So I have another option of behaving. So it's a way to actually refine myself and actually to develop, I guess, a bit more awareness of the other people's situation, but also my awareness of my responses to those people. So when we sort of get down to it, it sort of gets really difficult to think of other people that do not share the sort of same deepest desire, really, the sort of this desire for freedom. And sort of a sort of solidarity arises amongst everybody in your meditation, and this solidarity is about a common wish or desire for the welfare of each other. Well, that can arise, I think, from logically. I think it just sort of happens. There's one thing I want to say about the phrases, because some people get embroiled about the phrases, and I quite often don't change the phrases. I kind of try and think of them as a literal truth, and try and think of them literally true as well as with sincerity. So I try not to muck about with it too much, because actually I think there's ways of using those phrases over time that go deeper and deeper, and it becomes a deeper and deeper experience that's beyond just this sort of idea that I need some sort of gimmick to get myself interested, or I need some way of pumping up my metta or whatever. That doesn't seem to work for me. I just want to sort of stick with the standard thing and go deeper and deeper. Okay, so my time is up. So I'm just going to say that I do use some phrases. The phrases I do use are the 4 immeasurables, and I kind of reflect on them every day. And they're pretty much the same phrases, but it's may all beings be happy and know the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So how do we do that? Well, we may all beings never be separated from the great happiness which is free from suffering. And how do we do that? Well, may all beings dwell in a great equanimity, freed from craving, aversion, and ignorance. So that freedom and that vision of freedom is something that I think is a source of inspiration. Thank you.
Is it on? Yeah. I can't do conversational yet. I'm just going to read it. Yeah. Okay. Can people hear me? Okay. So one theme that has been really alive in my practice over the last year or two has been working on my low self-esteem and lack of confidence. It's like I've constantly been wearing a pair of poverty glasses that had deluded senses in them, and which made me engage with life from a place of inferiority and lack. To give a few examples of how that looked in my everyday life, I constantly compared myself to others. I was easily intimidated. I took criticisms personally. I doubted the sincerity of my friendships. I felt uncomfortable and restless in a lot of places. I deliberately held myself back, and I often felt not good enough. Previously in my practice, I'd worked on mostly knots that were operating on a conscious level. These were things that were more fully visible to me, possibly superficial and easily changeable, and they gave more immediate results. But the root of this poverty knot was more deeply entangled and embedded into my being. I couldn't just bring awareness to it to try and change it, because I couldn't fully see it. And in a way, I never made a conscious decision to work on it. This time, it felt like I was led by my depths, who had decided that it was time to sort this delusion out, or at least start looking at it. And it's been fascinating watching over time how the Dharma in my being has brought this knot up into digestible chunks for me to work on it. Whilst this theme has been worked through, my meditation practice has been vital and a deeply rich refuge throughout. It would be impossible for me to share the whole depth of what happened in my sits during working on this, so I'm going to share a few snapshots to try and illustrate just a bit of it. My first example comes from a memory from Buddha Day Festival in 2021. And I was sat in this great hall, listening to a visualization meditation, and my eyes were closed, and the Sangha were taking it in turns, reading out, is it Siddhartha's enlightenment story. The story reaches the point when Siddhartha is seated on the diamond throne and Mara appears again and asks, what right do you have to take your seat on the diamond throne? Now, I've heard that story many times, and that part has never previously moved me. But this time, I physically felt my depths activate. And when I started listening to Siddhartha explaining that he has the right because he's practiced the perfections for countless lifetimes, I just started crying and crying and crying. Later on, I reflected on what had happened, and I remember thinking, something is coming. I soon became completely obsessed with this part of the image, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. My second example is the Monday morning Hridaya team ritual. I was first invited to take part by Aryadasa, who I think might have predicted that I would say no thank you. There was a lot going on in this situation, and it was a classic example of how I held myself back. When Aryadasa asked me to join the ritual, the actual words he used were something like, T, would you like to join us for the Hridaya team ritual later? But what happened when I heard it was that my body reacted as if he'd said, T, would you like to come and try moving into right livelihood? Which sounded terrifying. Now, Aryadasa definitely didn't say those words, but emotionally, something painful and confusing was happening to me. Aryadasa wasn't giving me a job offer. He really was just inviting me to a ritual. But part of me really deeply wanted to try working here. And at the same time, huge parts of me didn't feel worthy or good enough. And whilst all this was kicking off inside, it all just got too much. So I said, no, thank you. And I have a sneaky suspicion that Aryadasa might have known that something else was going on, because he then said, instead of coming to the whole ritual, why don't you just come to meditate with us? To which I said, how long is it? So then he said, 25 minutes. So I thought about it, and then reluctantly I said, okay. So I joined them for meditation, and going into that red shrine room had nothing to do with me working there. I was simply going into a room to meditate with people who love me. But symbolically, psychologically, and emotionally, something much larger was at play. When I sat with them, the inferiority complex magnified tenfold. During the meditation, I felt intense intimidation and loads of excruciating sensations. One bizarre one being trapped fizzing energy in my throat, and I felt like I was choking. But the sit finished and I survived it. And for some reason, despite it all, I went back next week for some more. And I did this every week. Every week I sat with my friends, and every week I felt like I was choking. And every week I checked in about it. And I can't remember how many weeks this went on for, but eventually I sat for meditation with them and it had stopped. My third example happened last November, and it's about a 5-minute meditation that I did on a staircase one evening at the Edinburgh College of Art. To set the scene, I was part of a group of artists that had been invited to an evening of rooftop industry drinks. The room was full of individuals who worked in various Scottish art institutions, and as artists, we were expected to schmooze and network. The alcoholic drinks seemed bottomless. I didn't want to drink, and I just watched everyone else get tipsy and loosen up. Eventually, I usually feel very comfortable talking to strangers, but that evening, all of it was just too much. I felt intimidated and like I didn't deserve to be there. I had no project to pitch and nothing interesting to say. And as the evening went on, my confidence dropped more, and I just spiraled into a state of despair. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I found myself removing myself completely from the situation and walking out of the room. I went and hid on a quiet staircase in the corridor and put my head in my arms and just did a tiny but powerful just sitting meditation. I felt all of the uncomfortable sensations that were in my body, and I was amazed at how quickly the intensity of them subsided just from directly sitting in them. It's like I knew they weren't real, and then something inside me recalibrated, and when I was ready, I went back into the room with a renewed confidence. Later that night, during an intimidating networking dinner, why do I do it? I bonded so well with an artist next to me that they went out of their way to email me the following Monday, inviting me to contact them when I'm next in their country. This totally disproves my delusion that I'm not worth knowing. My last example is one that definitely disproves my deludedness. It's about my daily meditation practice. At the moment, I sit for 40 to 50 minutes in the morning and then 30 minutes in the evening. Last week, I was doing my evening sit and I went into one of the concentrated states. I don't think I know which one. I felt something that I felt quite a lot recently, but I haven't stopped to realize what it actually was. When I stopped and looked at it, I realized that I was deeply, beautifully content and totally satisfied. And when I realized this, I just sat and cried for the rest of the meditation. If there was ever any evidence that proved that I am absolutely minted, it's that feeling. This evening, I've shared a thread that is still raw and very alive for me, so it's been quite hard to share it with clarity. Although I've made progress in this particular topic, it continues to be a working ground. Because I wanted to share something messy and alive, because I wanted to demonstrate how my meditation shape shifts and sits within my practice in many forms. I hope that I've given you all a taste of how meditation slots into different ways into a larger frame or bigger themes within my practice. I have come to really rely on it, and it has become a refuge that is so strong that sometimes I don't realize that I'm leaving a room to do it. It is one of the most rewarding and the most transformational things that I've done. Thank you.